Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into something that honestly sounds like pure science fiction at first.
Yeah, it really does.
But the sources you shared, we're looking at a couple of YouTube clips, MRHB Network, TU Crypto News, and an article from Forbes. They're making it feel surprisingly real.
Well, yeah.
The big question is, what happens when humans aren't just visiting space, but actually, living and working off-world
Yeah.
and needing to pay for things?
Exactly. It's kind of the next frontier for economics, isn't it?
Yeah.
These sources make it pretty clear that with the way the space industry is growing, this isn't some question for 100 years down the line.
Right.
It's tied directly to the structures, the settlements, the outposts people are genuinely planning and starting to think about building now.
Right. And so our mission in this deep dive is basically to pull apart these sources. We want to understand why a growing space economy seems to absolutely require, well, completely new thinking about money. What potential opportunities are being talked about, and crucially, the really significant technical challenges, especially when we start talking about using things like, cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, the challenges are huge.
And there's this really interesting hook right at the start from the sources. Back in 2021, someone actually sent a physical Bitcoin wallet into space. Sort of a symbolic act?
It was, yeah. It wasn't just a stunt, I think. It felt like someone trying to position crypto as potentially universal, something that goes beyond Earth borders.
A powerful image, definitely, suggesting that maybe the financial rails we have right here on Earth just aren't the right fit for, well, the cosmos.
Oh, yeah, not built for it.
Which brings us nicely to the first major point. These sources really hammer home the practical problem, just making money work in space, even right now.
Yes, and this is where that Forbes piece gives us some fantastic perspective. It really highlights that we are genuinely at the start of an off-world economy. The billionaire space race talks about moon bases, maybe colonies on Mars.
Stuff that used to be purely sci-fi.
Right, but it's not anymore. People are seriously planning for habitation.
And when you have habitation, you obviously have people interacting. So the fundamental need the sources identify is actually pretty simple. It's transactions between people living and working in space.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, big companies paying each other back on Earth for launch services, but imagine, like, buying a tool from your neighbor on Mars or paying for a coffee at some orbital station.
And how does that even work today? Well, based on the sources, it's incredibly clunky. Any transaction basically has to go all the way down to Earth and then all the way back up again.
Okay, I can sort of wrap my head around that being maybe slow, but doable for somewhere close, like the International Space Station in low Earth orbit.
You'd think so.
But that Forbes source has this brilliant, very human story about astronaut Scott Kelly. He was trying to buy roses for his wife while he was up there on the ISS, and he actually struggled. That feels kind of wild for such a high-tech place.
It's pretty eye-opening, yeah. Here's an astronaut, cutting-edge technology all around him, and his basic banking experience was, well, awful.
Seriously?
Yeah. He needed, quote, incredible patience just to get a stable enough internet signal to even connect. The source quotes him saying that anything more sophisticated than just a simple transfer was really untenable.
Wow. Untenable.
Think about that. Basic financial stuff we barely think about on Earth was almost impossible for him up there.
Untenable for buying flowers. Okay, and the sources are clear. This problem only gets, exponentially worse the further out you go from Earth.
Oh, absolutely. On the moon, it's already less fine than the ISS. But Mars is where it becomes an almost insurmountable barrier with the systems we have now, the sheer distance. It introduces this massive, unavoidable problem, the speed of light.
Ah, right. The universe's speed limit. It's fast, but interplanetary distances are just huge.
Exactly. And the sources actually quantify this specifically for Mars. A transaction signal traveling from Mars to Earth and back again could take 20, 30, maybe even more minutes each way.
Wait, each way, not total.
Each way.
Yeah.
That's just the time for the data to get there.
Yeah.
And then that much time again for any kind of confirmation or response to get back. So you're potentially waiting an hour, maybe more, for a single transaction to just complete or confirm.
An hour to see if your payment went through. Yeah, you can instantly see how that just doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
The sources talk about these visions of maybe 10,000 people on Mars by mid-century, potentially millions by the end of the century.
Ambitious timelines.
As the sources put it, those populations are not going to want those transactions to have to travel the great distance to Earth and back. It would just paralyze any attempt at a real local economy.
Which transitions us perfectly to the next really crucial area the sources explore. why Earth money, our traditional money, doesn't really fit this future interplanetary picture, and why, in this context, crypto starts to look like, well, maybe a compelling alternative.
This is where that idea of a clean slate comes in, isn't it? The Forbes piece points out, quote, "There are no economies on these other planetary bodies. You're starting completely from scratch."
Precisely. And the sources lay out a pretty strong argument for why using Earth-based central bank currencies, the US dollar, the euro, whatever, fundamentally doesn't make sense on the moon or Mars.
Okay, but why exactly? Can't you just, take dollars with you? What specifically makes them unsuitable, according to the sources?
Well, the core argument is that these currencies are, quote, minted by a central bank that only has power within existing borders. And the key thing is those borders are on Earth.
Right, okay. So it's not just about physically carrying the cash or having the digital number. It's about the underlying authority, the thing that backs it. You're saying it's sort of like trying to print yen in Mexico or pesos in Japan. The authority that makes that money valid just isn't there.
That's the analogy one source uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They also bring up international agreements that already exist for places like the moon.
Yeah.
Just planting a flag doesn't give a nation sovereignty over the land.
The Outer Space Treaty, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And similar agreements are expected for Mars eventually, preventing any one nation from just claiming ownership. So if the territory isn't actually controlled by a specific Earth nation-state, why would its inhabitants use a currency tied specifically to a nation-state millions of miles away? It feels illogical.
It really forces you to think about what actually gives money its value and legitimacy, doesn't it?
Right.
The sources also briefly touch on some perceived issues with Earth's current central bank system anyway. Things like, inflation concerns, exchange rate headaches, those transaction delays even here on Earth. Countries maybe not trusting each other's currencies, and even mentions of alleged fraud against citizens.
Right. They sort of list these as background reasons why people are already looking to reimagine currency, making that clean slate in space seem particularly appealing.
And in that context, the sources suggest that for a currency needed for, say, orbiting hotels or actual settlements on the moon or Mars, crypto just makes sense.
That's the phrase used.
And the main reason the sources give for why crypto seems like a potential fit here.
Because, as the source notes, it's not a fiat currency from any particular government. It's designed, or at least the idea is, to be decentralized, not tied to the borders or the authority of any single nation state.
Okay.
Which seems to align almost perfectly with the idea of building an economy on a planet or moon that isn't claimed or governed by Earth nations.
Okay, right. So we've got this clear need emerging for off-world transactions. We've got the strong case from the sources that traditional Earth money is probably a bad fit, practically and politically. And then crypto enters the chat as a compelling alternative because it's potentially borderless, decentralized. The sources even mention other related ideas, like the possibility of space mining for crypto.
Yes, one source brought that up, specifically citing Canadian Bitcoin core developer Peter Todd, who apparently thought that mining Bitcoin in space is entirely feasible.
Feasible, really, with the power requirements and...
He suggested it could become economically viable if, and it's a big if, the cost of sending cargo up to space drops significantly. And he points to advancements by companies like SpaceX as potentially making that happen down the line.
Huh. So you might not just use crypto on another planet, you might actually create it there too. That's another layer.
It does. But now we hit the massive, undeniable technical problem the sources highlight. When it comes to using current distributed ledgers, current blockchains like Bitcoin, across these massive interplanetary distances, this is the big one, isn't it?
Yeah, this feels like the elephant in the room. Or maybe the elephant floating between planets.
Yeah, it's a fundamental challenge. These systems, like Bitcoin's blockchain, they were designed to work here on Earth. And as the sources explain, they really only work on relatively short distances. And why? It all comes back, again, to the speed of light.
Because the whole point of a distributed ledger is that everyone, or lots of nodes, have the same copy, and they need to agree. And that agreement relies on data moving between them.
And that data is limited by physics. How fast light or any electromagnetic signal can travel.
Right.
On Earth, even going across continents, the speed of light lets financial transactions move quickly enough for the network to stay basically in sync. The sources say for Earth distances, that's fine, it works.
But contrast that with the huge delay we talked about caused by light speed between Earth and Mars. That 20, 30, maybe more minutes one-way travel time.
Exactly. So the absolute core technical question the sources are grappling with is this. How do you sync up a distributed network of computers that are helping process transactions without a central middleman across such vast distances?
Yeah.
If you have part of your Bitcoin network, say, on Earth and another part on Mars, they are fundamentally operating with minutes, potentially close to an hour, of delay between them. How do you maintain a single, agreed-upon, verifiable transaction history when information takes that long just to get from one part of the network to the other?
It sounds almost impossible with current blockchain designs. How do you prevent double spending, for instance, if the confirmation takes an hour to cross the solar system?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? And the sources are pretty direct about it.
Yeah.
The answer to that question isn't simple. It's not something you can just tweak. It's a recognized major challenge baked into the physics of the situation.
But they do say people are working on it.
They do mention that there are people that are trying to solve that. So the problem is clearly identified. The need for some kind of innovation is obvious. It's an active area of thought, even if the solution isn't here yet.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap this deep dive then, based on these sources you shared. We've seen that this whole space economy thing is creating a very real, practical need for person-to-person transactions off Earth. Soon, potentially.
It's coming.
We've unpacked the pretty compelling arguments from the sources for why our regular Earth-based currencies are, frankly, a poor fit for an interplanetary economy, both practically because of delays and sort of philosophically because of jurisdiction.
Using those vivid analogies.
Right, like printing dollars in Japan.
Exactly. And we've explored why cryptocurrencies, mainly because they're designed to be decentralized, emerge as this potential compelling idea for this unique, clean slate environment. We even touch on related things like maybe mining crypto in space someday.
Yeah, the potential is there. But we've also squarely faced the huge fundamental technical problem highlighted in the sources, that absolute barrier of the speed of light delay over interplanetary distances. It just throws a massive wrench into the works for keeping current distributed ledgers, like blockchains, properly synced up.
It's the core issue, yeah.
Yeah.
It requires some serious innovation, some new thinking to overcome.
And this isn't just theory anymore, is it? It's framed as a practical problem that future people living on the moon, or Mars, or maybe in big orbital habitats, will need solved if they're going to have any kind of functional local economy. How will they handle money day to day?
Exactly. How do you buy, sell, trade, save, invest when your nearest bank branch, or even just the next node in your financial network, is light minutes away?
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought, building directly on that speed of light challenge from the sources. If current distributed ledger tech is fundamentally limited by light speed over these distances, what kind of financial system could actually function smoothly across delays of light minutes, or even light hours? What would the architecture of a system like that even look like, and how might it have to be fundamentally different from how we think about and handle money right here, right now?
It's a fascinating problem. It forces us to think not just outside the box, but potentially millions and millions of miles beyond it.
Yeah.